Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE, GMAT, and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, a built in study planner and essay grader, and full length practice exams. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to save 10%. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Nick Barniville, and Nick, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and your company.
Sure, yeah. So, Nick Barniville, I'm from Ireland. I've spent the last 15 years in Germany and the last 25 years working in top European business schools. I set up my own strategy consulting company to work with universities and business schools on their strategic development a couple of years ago. But prior to that, I was responsible for the whole value chain of the business school process from marketing, admissions, program operations, and career services right through to alumni in various different schools, including INSEAD, European School of Management and Technology in Berlin, University College Dublin in Ireland. So all over on the European side of the pond.
Great. Yeah, really excited to have this discussion today. And, I think that a lot of the big trends that are driving these things are true kind of no matter which side of the pond that you're on. I want to start out by just, first asking about like what is today's job market, just for the purposes of this discussion, right? Like, I want you to kind of define like what are the major trends that you're seeing and basically like what's sort of the big picture that a student's graduate school decision lives inside of today.
Yeah, so I think whereas previously, even when I started in this industry, people would go to graduate school and train for different functional jobs. There were jobs that you could actually train for. You could learn the skills that you could walk in the next day and start applying, whether they be research oriented skills in a consulting company or project management skills, etc. But now I think the context with AI is changing significantly. So the typical entry level roles for graduate professionals coming out of business schools, they're to a certain extent disappearing. So if you look at, there was many companies in consulting or in finance that would be major providers of employment as a first job coming out of business school. They'd operate on a traditional pyramid model. So you'd have a lot of people coming in at the base in the entry level jobs. And I think with the increased prevalence of AI, I think a lot of those entry level jobs are disappearing, and business
Mhm.
school graduates are kind of expected to have much more AI resilient skills, I would call it. So I think there's a growing focus on complex problem solving skills, critical thinking skills, creativity, emotional intelligence, and I think in many cases, what's complicating the decision to go to graduate school is many companies, and you only have to do your research into the big companies that you might be looking at. Many of the major hires from business schools, anyway, they're cutting back on the level of graduate hire and entry level hires, and also maybe even freezing the salaries that they're offering to people coming out of graduate school. So and shifting maybe towards more experienced hires who can display some of those more complex human skills that are required in the changing environment.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the biggest things to even like just sort of set the discussion for everything else that we're trying to do, right? I feel like this sort of trend of, like you talked about the pyramid, and I think it's a good way to just visualize jobs at companies, right? Like, there'll be three marketers, and then there'll be a marketing manager, and then that team of four will be under directors, a team of nine, right? Because there's two groups of four maybe, and then that person, and it just kind of goes up the pyramid that like that. And the bottom was all these entry level jobs, and those jobs is where you learned the real role, right? I think that, I'm not super familiar with like trade schools or things like that, but like outside of trade schools, it feels like a lot of times like what you're learning in college is kind of the concepts. You don't actually learn the real job until you get into the real job, right? And so when those roles are going away, that means that it's like a narrower group of people are going to get them, which, I could totally see having an impact on people who maybe want to use grad school to career switch. But on the other hand, if I'm hiring, I'd maybe rather have a graduate school student who is career switching than have, you know, another random person who is career switching, right? Getting that graduate education in that topic would definitely be meaningful for me. And then I also think that, if I'm choosing between somebody who graduated undergrad in this versus someone who graduated grad school, I still think that the grad school person has a leg up. But definitely, I mean, I guess so that is sort of the question. You could make an argument both ways on how AI is going to change the calculus of the graduate school decision, because on the one hand, it's not just a guarantee that you're going to get your MBA and then get a job in whatever industry you want to get it in, like it used to be. But on the other hand, maybe you're going to be getting jobs that otherwise you wouldn't get, which is still kind of the point.
Yeah, to a certain extent, I agree with you. But if you're somebody who wants to go to graduate school and believes that it should pay, but really hasn't done, if you haven't done your homework, if you're somebody who's for whatever reason, your brain works in a way that you're not able to display complex problem solving skills, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, or creativity, you're not going to get a job. You're going to waste your money. So, if you are an optimist in the world and you believe that everybody can display those skills, I think if everybody is innately able to display those skills, then yes, those who have gone on for further intellectual training at graduate school will probably have the leg up. But I think people should really just be really honest with themselves and say, you know, do I have that level of cognitive ability with or without graduate school? And is it going to be worth my while, or should I be pursuing an entirely different path than a business career, for example? I just think that the skills that are required are becoming a little bit more specific, and maybe not everybody fits the bill, and there are other things that they could be doing.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about skills being specific, right? I mean, it's probably worth parsing out kind of. I think that graduate school, at the end of the day, the reason why people go to graduate school for the most part is to like unlock some way of making more money, whether that's a specialized career or whether that is advancing in the same career. And so, I mean, is this conversation just different for different types of jobs, right? Like, I mean, I certainly think that there are some advanced degrees, particularly the ones that are like required, that I don't really see that changing, right? But maybe there are some like an MBA that you would be worried about. I'm just curious kind of if there's a distinction between different types of graduate degrees.
Yeah, I think, there are certain professions that probably require a certification through a graduate degree. And, you might have, for example, an accounting degree might need a specific set of courses to be completed before you can actually be admitted to a job. But I think, yeah, general degrees, I think the curricula themselves need to change to allow the participants on those programs to display the higher order thinking skills that are going to be required by employers. I think, I think entry level generalism is just it's getting difficult to sell in today's market. So maybe we're going to see, and it's been the case in Europe for a while that people going to graduate school tend to have they already have 6 or 7 years professional experience under their belt. And in the US, people tend to go a lot younger. I think you might see, and this is only conjecture. I mean, I have no evidence for this, but over the next couple of years, you might see the age of graduate school students creep up as the potential hiring for people coming out of graduate school becomes a little more demanding from the employer side. I don't know. Have you seen that, or are you seeing that at
I,
all?
well, I just think that it's just more competitive. And I think that I'm operating in an area, doing marketing online that like credentialing or like yeah, like things like graduate school are considered like nice to haves but not like necessary. So I'm only looking at like a very specific slice of this problem. I mean, you talked about sort of like employer expectations. I mean, what are you seeing? Because you now are like a consultant, right? So what are you seeing as far as employer expectations on your side and how they're changing?
Yeah, so I can only kind of reiterate what I said before. I think, and you said it yourself. You will learn what you need to learn on the job. You will just need to be able to handle different technologies that are thrown at you, and you will need to be able to process information in quite a complex way. So I think what I'm seeing from employers is that they're looking for these people who are better able to demonstrate their critical thinking ability and better able to relate to people on a human level. So that all leads to things becoming a bit more competitive.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, it's going to be kind of interesting for applicants because they need to figure out like now trying to hit a moving target, right? I mean, one of the things that I like have thought about quite a bit in the last 5 years is, if you had told me in 2020 that little Timmy was going to college to get a computer science degree, I would have said, "Oh, that's awesome. They're probably going to make a lot of money in their career." Now, 4 years later, there's no jobs for those people, right? Because AI showed up and took a lot of the entry level programming jobs off the market. And I just, if you're looking at that precedent and you're saying, okay, well, I want to do a 2 or 3 year commitment to grad school, how am I going to know that I'm going to get out on the other side and everything's going to still be like attractive for me? So,
Yeah, I
how do
did, on
what
the
advice do you have for people trying to evaluate that, right?
well, my advice would be if somebody came to me, I'd say, well, try to go with a little bit more experience and try to choose a program that's not 2 years or 3 years. Try to choose a program that's 1 year and get back onto the market before it's changed utterly. Yeah, if you look at all of the programs, or almost all of the programs outside of outside of the US, almost every program, the MBA program, for example, is 1 year or 15 months or 16 months. So I'm not sure that the typical 2 year MBA program has all that much of a future outside of the really top 10 programs. It's certainly no new 2 year program has been launched in since I started in my career. There's lots of new 1 year MBA programs, the shorter graduate programs. If you look at, for example, the probably the top European school or one of the top three European schools is INSEAD. Their program is 10 months. So there it's less of a moving target than if you're trying to apply for something 6 months before it starts, and then 2 years later you think you might graduate. So that is really difficult. So I would just encourage people to maybe consider shorter programs.
Yeah, I mean, what are the advantages of the shorter program? You already touched on one, which is a year it feels like is a lot less time to be out of the market than other things. I mean, is that the main advantage? I think also is it just
Yeah, the
because I,
opportunity.
I feel like one of the like at least the business schools, one of the big selling points is, oh, the network, you'll build this great network. Well, networks or like socializing takes time. So there's a
You
trade-off.
build a network with whom? You build a network with your cohort. It doesn't matter if it's 1 year or 2 years, and then you build a network as a person rather than necessarily somebody who's attending an institution. I don't buy that at all. I think you can develop you can develop a network with your peers, and you can develop access to an alumni network within 1 year in equally as you can do that in 2 years. What the 2 year programs allow you to do is specialize, allow you to go deeper into certain topics, and you know maybe that's useful if the topics are in demand from employers, or if it's something that you've already got some experience in and you want to go deeper, or if it's a matter of sort of, I just have interest and I want to stay for a bit longer in education. That's fine. But if somebody's really looking for a value play in graduate education, I don't really see the benefit of going for 2 years. um, except that you do typically get an internship, so you get some professional experience in a career that you might want to go into afterwards. That's the downside of a 1 year program, is they don't really have internships, or very short
Right.
meaningless ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, then let's talk a bit about just like, so if you're advocating for people to look at shorter programs, which I think is great. But also, let's talk about just like the different types of programs, right? You've got, ones that are online versus hybrid versus in person, and then you've also got, sort of the executive MBAs and other things like that, and the apprenticeship type programs versus just, kind of just go to school and do that full time. Yeah, I guess just like how do you help people consider which of these is going to be best for them, and how do employers view it on the other end?
think employers don't mind at all. I think from an employer perspective, it's pretty irrelevant what format the person has studied. But I think, the more somebody wants to change, I think the more time they have to devote to the peripheral activities outside of the classroom. So working on themselves, working on their own motivations, working on how to express those, working on, their own professional profile and understanding what they want to do themselves. So that would maybe push somebody more towards a full time program. But if somebody is really looking to accelerate in a trajectory on which they already find themselves and are looking to change around the edges, but really to upskill in their current domain, I would say there's no need for them to leave the workforce entirely, and they could do an online, a hybrid, or an executive program if they had the right level of seniority. For me now, if I looking back, like if I was sort of talking to my younger self, I think the quality of participants on executive programs is just you just get so much more life experience in the classroom that I would try to maybe postpone my decision to go to an executive program. But what we tend to find is that people who go to executive MBA programs are people who didn't do one before. It's kind of like, oh, they always wanted to do one but didn't, so decided to do an executive MBA, for example, a little bit later.
Well, it's just like, they're going to be executives, hopefully, right? Or people that want to become executives. So it is going to be perhaps a different crowd
Mm.
than people that are like career switching into an MBA, right? Though I think in general, most people that are going for an MBA know what they're doing and what they're talking about. So, well, yeah, then I just guess just the other thing, we talked a little bit about these different types of graduate programs. Well, there's also like stuff that is even outside the box compared to that, right? You've got, you know, micro credentials, and you and I can go get ourselves certified in things like, at least in this is marketing world, but like Google AdWords, right? Or things like that. Or we could take some courses on LinkedIn or whatever, right? Like there's a million of these things now, and you know how important they are depends a lot on the industry and kind of the job that you're applying for. But some of them are very meaningful. Something, like a CFA certification is
Yep.
very meaningful in the finance world. A, Lean Six Sigma black belt or whatever it's called certification for project management is very meaningful. But then some of them, like the Google AdWords certification, really aren't. So, how do you think these kind of, you know, credentials or skills are being taken into account more as employers consider different applicants in 2026? And how much do you think people should be focused on them versus MBA programs?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think as you mentioned, it really depends on the particular roles. For example, if I'm hiring for somebody for a role in business intelligence, for example, then I would be very happy to see them with a certification in Tableau or in Power BI and whatsoever. And maybe they don't necessarily need an MBA. It's quite a technical role, and there are certain things that they need to be able to do well to do their job properly. But in typical roles for which business school graduates are hired, I don't think micro credentials are going to allow you to demonstrate the acquisition of of things like of your problem solving skills, or you build your portfolio of courses that show you as a problem solver or as a creative person, or you develop examples of where you can display your emotional intelligence. You can't do any of that on the micro credential side of things. So I think it really depends on the role. They definitely have their uses, and a lot of the time people will go for the micro credentials to improve their prospects within their current organization, or for maybe jobs which are not at the same level as those for which graduate students are aspiring.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I mean, it's gonna be a long time, I think, until the old sort of university based system goes away, right?
I think so. Certainly
Yeah.
undergrad. I think we might see some shifts in postgrad. I think the biggest shifts will come in post experience, postgraduate. So, where you have in the US in particular, you've got a very underdeveloped MSc market. So where people stay on after their undergraduate and immediately do a postgraduate program. In business, you've much more a culture of people going working for a couple of years, and then going to a business school. In Europe, the trend where all the growth is in pre-experienced masters. So that means people will stay on after their undergraduate. They'll do something either a little bit more specific or a little bit more international right after their undergraduate, and then they will probably never come back to graduate school, but they will focus more on shorter certification courses or leadership courses or various levels of upskilling throughout their career. So it will be the lifelong learning perspective will become a lot more constant, and the probably in Europe first before the States, the idea of a postgraduate degree program post experience will fade away a bit quicker.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I think that that is a good prediction. And it just, to me, it just makes more sense. I just feel like sort of the monolithic, like go to one school, learn all the things, doesn't really make a ton of sense when as everything else gets more fragmented and specialized, right?
I
We'll
agree.
see.
Like I think the whole more lifelong learning like really is I think becoming more prevalent, and this sort of stop start I think that's going to go away.
Yeah. Well, great. And then the last thing that I wanted to ask is, what advice would you give students that are looking to make these decisions, right? I mean, it feels like it's become much more complicated than it used to be to determine whether you want to go to graduate school or not. And then on top of that, it's also, there's a lot of different options once you want to get there or how you get there. And so, yeah, how do you like take all this into consideration and particularly in 2026 as we're kicking off this year?
I always think that people are so focused on the outcome rather than the journey. And I think maybe if people could think a little bit more about the journey that they're going through, and if it's intrinsically motivating to go and study something that they're interested in for whether it's 1 year, whether it's 2 years. There's a certain excitement about that people underestimate. And I think really not everything should be if I do this, then X or Y will happen, because it probably won't. I mean, all you need to do is look at admissions essays of people going to graduate school and people say what they want out of it. And I don't think very, very rarely seen anybody who ends up doing what they think they want to do afterwards. Things change so much through the experience people have and the inspiration people get when they actually do go for further studies. So I would encourage people to just really try to find a place and people with whom they feel comfortable and embark on a journey that they're excited about, and you know let the process do its work. Obviously, you need motivation and you need to have some security that there's going to be value in it. But I think if you find the right place and you're excited and motivated by what you're getting yourself into, and you have honest discussions on the way in with the people who are trying to judge whether you're going to be a fit or not, then I think you won't lose.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Nick Barniville from Gomera Tech. And Achievable has a great online GRE course that you can try for free by going to achievable.me.